Passion in my pocket, so my penny should be. What they selling is cheap, so I'm buying that this freedom is free. I've been becoming me. See, when Jesus taking the lead, with purpose I bleed and rise like going under the heat. Defeat is a never. You can't reattach with a sever. What's bringing you pleasure can tell you where you stacking your treasure. When storm is your weather, know that it gets worse for it's better.
Welcome to the Holy Post Podcast. I'm your host, Esau McCaulley. I'm joined by our producer, who is not the co-host, but who is currently on screen a lot. Michael, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Esau. I'm not the co-host, but I think I'm an instrumental part.
Yeah, you're a part of the podcast. And we also have Nijay Gupta, and I want to make sure I have this correct. The Julius R. Manti Professor of New Testament at Northern Seminary. Is that correct?
That's right. Yep, that's right.
And I might call you Nijay from here on out, but just to give you a little bit of context. We're here to talk about your book, The Affections of Paul. Did I say that correctly?
Affections of Christ.
The Affections of Christ, Recovering the Heart of Paul's Theology. Did I get it correct?
No.
Okay.
Heart of Paul's Theology.
See, I didn't have it in front of me. I should have written it down.
He's testing me.
Okay, go. I knew it was The Affections of Christ. I was thinking, give me the title, Nijay, so I don't mess it up.
All right. The Affections of Christ Jesus, Love at the Heart of Paul's Theology.
Okay, then. See, that's basically what I said.
But it's not what you said.
It's not what I said. That's fair. I was so caught up in getting to the next part that forgive me for butchering the title. Normally, we play this game called Are You Washed? And that's whether or not you have the idea is, do you have the confidence to discuss the matter at hand? Mm-hmm. But I feel like we've been a little bit too silly in the Are You Washed part.
Okay.
And so I thought that we should do something a little bit more, because we're going to talk about the affections of Christ.
Yeah.
I felt like we should do something with a little bit more, with a love theme.
Oh, I like that.
And so I thought that this week we would ask this question. When was the last time or the most recent time, or the thing that jumps to your imagination, it was someone, and I thought about going romantic love, but I said, this is not about romance. We're not going to just talk about when you and your spouse met or whatever.
Yeah.
When was the last time a member of the church showed you love? I will start us off. And this one isn't even going to be that deep because it happened on church on Sunday. So I was preaching. This is going to sound like not that deep, but it really meant a lot to me. There was this black couple that came to our church, and we had other black people in our church. These are not black people in our church, but there's a particular black couple that was visiting on Sunday. And it was clear that they're from the Baptist tradition that I was from. And I was preaching, and they started speaking back to me, with the amen, go ahead and say that. And I was like, man, this felt so good. Because I don't know anyone, if you've never preached a sermon in front of black people, I'm assuming.
We have, I have preached, and we do have a few black families in our church, but not a lot of black families.
Okay, do they talk to you?
I've gotten one or two.
One or two?
Yeah.
Was it an amen, or was it a say that, or was it a come on? What was it?
It was more like an amen.
Okay, then. So there's something about that particular form of encouragement of the clergy person that it kind of lifts me up as a preacher. And so I just felt like, I was like, thank you so much. And I think once they said it, it gave permission to some other people to kind of toss in some stuff. So there's a sprinkling of a little bit of verbal encouragement from the congregation.
Wait,
so that
quick question before you move on.
Yeah.
Does anyone ever overdo it in the congregation? Are you kind of okay,
awkward?
Now it's distracting.
Maybe I'm not that good of a preacher. I've never got someone who's overly enthusiastic.
Okay. Yeah.
But no, I think there's an etiquette that if you've been in that culture that it tends to happen. So I don't know. I would say there are different elements of it where if you're struggling, they will also say, help him. And you don't want too many help him lords. Because that means if you're starting to go sideways, you need the Lord to help him.
We can cut this if we don't like it.
Yeah.
One of the first times I preached, I was interning at my church as a college student, and I got the task to go give a sermon at the local nursing home.
Yeah.
And I probably already wasn't a very good preacher anyway at 21 or whatever, let alone then trying to figure out as a 21-year-old what to say in a sermon to a bunch of 90-year-olds who
I can see why that would be tricky.
It would be hard. Mm-hmm. And so I'm fumbling through my sermon, and in the front row, I hear this woman lean over and try to whisper to her friend, but it was not a whisper. and she goes, he's not very good, is he?
Oh, no. This is about affection. See, I was trying to be positive.
I went the opposite way.
Nijay, when was the last time you got some affection from your church?
Yeah. I got a couple quick examples. One is I was speaking to my son's FCA group, high school group, and he's 16. He wants to be cool among his friends, and so he didn't hang around with me very much. But when it was done, he was walking out. He came up to me, gave me a fist bump. And that was like, that was nice because, you could just ignore me, move on, pretend we're not related. But that was nice. And the other one was I was preaching at a church about 30 minutes from my house, and people come up to you afterwards, thank you for being there. And a woman came up and she gave me herbs from her garden. I'm a food person, so
that was nice.
If you want to give me something after church. So she gave me a whole bunch of basil. And so I went out and bought pasta. We had pasta that night. Those are the things. I remember the food.
So I want to say this. This should make you feel better about your son. I don't know if we talked about this on the podcast. If we have, like you said, you can cut it. But there was this stream where Mariah Carey's son was doing a live stream, like a Twitch stream. And Mariah Carey walks by the live stream, and all of a sudden the comments are like blowing up. It's Mariah Carey, and Mariah Carey's son was like, "Mom, get out of here!" He was so embarrassed. Like, if you're embarrassed by Mariah Carey as your mom, all of us are going to be lame forever. So you had the negative one. Do you have a positive one?
We'll go on the opposite end. I fill in preaching sometimes at my church and other churches I know, and I got invited to a church back near my hometown a few months ago. I've never preached there before. I don't know how they got my contact info, but I said yes.
In the podcast.
Yeah,
you're blowing up now.
Yeah, something like that. And at the end, like a bunch of encouraging words, which was nice, but the woman in charge of their kind of search committee said I'm moving you to the top of my list. And I just assumed like, polite Midwestern small talk. You don't mean that. But they just reached out like last week and said like, hey, you're the first one we called. We'd love to have you come back.
I thought you were saying search committee like they was going to hire you.
No, not hiring.
You're announcing that you're leaving.
Supply. Search committee for pulpit supply.
I thought this was going to be the breakup.
I thought that too.
Yeah. So we did not come here to talk about like all of our positive experiences at church, but about your book. Now, this might be a straightforward question, but every book has an origin story. Right. Why did you decide to write a book about Paul and love?
So there's kind of the academic answer, and then there's sort of the, culture sort of answer. The academic answer is I write commentaries. I write, these Bible studies on steroids. And, what we do is we're interpreting the text, we're reading through it, and then we get to a word and we're like, I want to find some scholarship on this. So if you have fellowship or if you have wisdom or revelation, and a book like love, you would think, there's a million books on this subject. Right. And you go to like the dictionary, like Dictionary of Paul and His Letters, or you go to like, any variety of Christian theology dictionaries. And I was shocked that there wasn't really much written on Paul and love. You have a journal article here and there, but in terms of a book you could hand somebody and say, hey, if you're studying this, read this. So I looked it up. I did some research. I figured out no one's written a book like this in over 100 years.
100 years. Wow. So let me get this straight. I mean, I feel like we should stop the podcast here. He's the first person in 100 years to talk about Paul and love. Maybe because I want to run ahead to us, because when we think about, if we wanted to compare that to Paul and justification, it feels like those books come out like every 18 months.
Yeah, there's a lot.
And I remember when me and Nijay are roughly the same age. We're in our mid 40s. And I think I remember that it was sometime when me and you were in seminary. I think someone even called for a moratorium on books about Paul and justification. Remember this? There was such a deluge of them. But I don't know anyone ever said, you know what our problem is? We talk too much about love. You said there's stuff that was going on in the culture too that led to you wanting to write it?
Yeah. On the cultural end too, what I've been noticing the last 10, 15 years of American culture, and this actually comes a little bit out of my book, Strange Religion, is when I talk to, I live in Portland, Oregon, one of the most unchurched, to some degree, anti-Christian parts of the United States. When I talk to my neighbors and they realize I'm a Christian, they're kind of surprised.
Yeah.
Because what they think about Christians, they know from the news.
Yeah.
So they think of Christians as belligerent, hostile on social media, know-it-alls, closed-minded, bigots, discriminatory. And so when I wrote Strange Religion, I felt this tension between what I read in the Bible, Christians should be the most loving people, and what I hear from my neighbors where they say, I would never want my kids to hang out with a Christian.
Yeah.
And so I wrote this book to say, when you talk about what's Paul's obsession, justification only occurs in a a couple of his books. I mean, it's really there in Romans and Galatians and a little bit in 1 Corinthians. It's not all over the place.
Yeah.
But love is in every letter, including Philemon, his shortest letter.
Oh, there we go.
It's spotlighted. And you know what often happens, Esau, is a big book on Paul's theology by Douglas Moo or by even N.T. Wright, if he's listening. He might correct me. He might have said it and correct me.
I mean, I'm sure given Paul, so this is going to be such an inside baseball nerd thing. I'm sure given the link to Paul and the faithfulness of God, there was probably 100 words, 100 pages on love. There's something for everybody. There's a book about everything in that book. And I love that book. I'm one of the people who ride to say that book could get harshly criticized. But anyways, go ahead.
Well, what ends up happening is if you put love in the book at all, you tend to put it at the end under a little section called Christian ethics.
Yeah.
And it's just like, let's be nice to each other. Let's hug each other now and again. But what I found when I read the Bible, when I read Paul in particular, is it should actually go at the beginning of the conversation.
Yeah.
Love is the beginning of Paul's theology, the middle and the end. It's everywhere throughout. So what I'm noticing culturally, Esau, is I have this thing, you may have heard me do this before, but I have this lecture I give on this book called What Happened to Ned Flanders.
No,
so this is from The Simpsons.
I've never heard the Ned Flanders lecture. Enlighten us all here.
What happened to Ned Flanders? So this is a tribute to Oregon because The Simpsons is from this particular part of the country.
I thought the whole point of Springfield, you're not supposed to know where it is.
Yeah, but the origins.
Oh, the origin. I have no idea. Sorry.
Here.
Here's an early moment of cultural shame. Haven't watched Simpsons in like 2 decades. Easy.
That's fine, because all the best episodes were back then. So go back to 1985.
Yeah.
And the stereotype of the white male evangelical was Ned Flanders.
Oh, yeah.
He's a little legalistic, kind of a goody-goody, but unfailingly kind. The first person to bring you soup when you're sick.
Yeah.
The first person to help you if your car gets stuck. Like this is what the American view of evangelicalism was then. At least according to one of the smartest TV shows right out there.
Yeah.
Fast forward 40 years. And what I ask the audience is, I say, where do you think that image has gone? I don't name names. Yeah. I don't name names, but I say, you tell me. You tell me what, it's not Ned Flanders, so what is it now? They'll say hatred, animosity, racism, sexism, all this stuff. So the question is, what's happened in the last 40 years?
We've had the loss of love. I never thought about it, but you're correct. I don't think that if we were to make Simpsons now, I have no idea what happened to Ned Flanders as the show kind of unfolded. But one of the things that's one of the things I was thinking about as you were getting into this book. There's sometimes where maybe you can kind of read where the culture is going, because people don't understand that we start writing books 2 or 3 years or 4 or 5 years before people see them. Then they finish and then they come out. And so an idea that might have been a good idea 4 years ago when the book was first created may no longer be relevant by the time the book gets there. And so the thing that I find really interesting about this is that you're right, that there is this sense in which, and I know this book isn't just about empathy, and I don't want to turn this into another empathy conversation. But the idea that Christianity is too soft and that it's too loving, and in order for Christianity to be relevant, it needs to be strong and masculine and those kinds of things again, feels to be prominent right at this moment. And for you to come out with a book that even has the word affections in it as a title, to me seems super appropriate. Hi, it's Esau. If you're looking for another fascinating podcast that touches on religion and spirituality, I have the perfect recommendation for you. The Signal award-winning show, No Small Endeavor. As a friend and recent guest of the podcast, I can truly say it's worth a listen. Produced by Great Feeling Studios and PRX, No Small Endeavor explores what it means to live a good life. Each episode, host Lee C. Kemp sits down with special guests like pastor and theologian Tish Harrison Warren, civil rights hero Reverend James Lawson, and one of the world's most influential living theologians, Stanley Hauerwas, to discuss how their faith shaped their journey. If you're looking for a place to start, check out their recent episode with Americana songwriter Drew Holcomb, in which he unpacks how creativity is a way to overcome fear, make something that didn't exist before. It's a beautiful heart-to-heart. Don't miss out. Follow No Small Endeavor on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. Sometimes I'm shocked at how old my kids have gotten and how big they've gotten over the last year. But it also occurs to me that if they're getting older, so am I. And that's why planning for my family's financial security is a top priority, to make sure we're well prepared and to have enough insurance in case something unexpected happened. Fabric by Gerber Life makes it simple to get protection that's right for your family. Fabric by Gerber Life is term life insurance you can get done right from your couch, all online and on your own schedule. You can be covered in 10 minutes with no health exam required. And if you've got kids, and especially if you're young and healthy, you can lock in low rates right now. And even if you have life insurance through your employer, it might not offer enough protection for your family, and it might not follow you if you leave your job. Fabric has flexible, high-quality policies that fit your family and your budget, like $1 million in coverage for less than $1 a day. Fabric has partnered with Gerber Life, trusted by millions of families like yours for over 50 years. There's a no-risk, 30-day money-back guarantee, and you can cancel at any time. They have over 1,900 five-star reviews on Trustpilot with a rating of excellent. Fabric was designed for busy parents just like you. It is more than life insurance, free digital wills, access to investment accounts to invest for your kids' future and more, and you can manage it all right from your phone. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their family. Apply today in just minutes at meetfabric.com/Esau. That's meetfabric.com/Esau. MEET fabric.com/Esau. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Insurance Company, not available in certain states. Prices subject to underwriting and health questions.
Zones Field got him doing football numbers, only average grown. He was acting grown.
You open up the book, though. You don't just immediately jump into what Paul says about love. You actually begin with a lot of linguistic study. And without, completely losing our lay audience, or maybe some of our pastors who say, I don't want you to talk about Greek for 45 minutes. But can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing in those early chapters and how you're even engaging in modern understandings of love? Like, what are you trying to help us understand at the beginning part of the book?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing you learn in seminary is the dangers of concordancism.
Okay.
So concordancism is the idea that I want to look up love, so I'm going to look up the word love.
Yeah.
And the problem with that is we use a lot of different expressions to get at the same thing.
Yeah.
So even the title of my book uses the word affections.
Yeah.
And this actually comes from the beginning of Philippians. And so I actually made, I think, a bit of a mistake when I wrote my book on faith. I wrote a book called Paul and the Language of Faith. And you were actually in a review session of my book where we're with academics.
Yeah.
And one of the reviewers, Jeanette Pfeiffer, she actually said, Nijay, why did you focus on pistis only, which is the Greek word for faith?
Oh, yeah.
And I said, at the moment I said, there's so much literature. Later on, I thought that was a mistake.
Yeah.
And we call this the word thing fallacy, that if the word is absent, the thing is absent.
Yeah.
And what I realized with this book is I wanted to fix that. So I wanted to say, what are all the ways we get at this language? And one thing I really wanted to dig into, Esau, I hope you like this, was modern emotion theory.
Yeah.
Modern emotion theory. This is huge because there are other books on love. Douglas Campbell has done work on this.
Yeah.
Michael Gorman has done work on this. But I feel like I'm the first person to bring in modern emotion theory. So I'm going to do something I hope that'll be a little bit fun. Can you trace back, Mike or Esau, can you trace back where the first popularization of the phrase love is a verb?
Ooh. Oh,
love
my
is
goodness.
A verb. It's not DC talk. Even if you think it's...
That was my first...
I have no... you caught me on this one. I don't know. Luther Vandross?
What about... So my first guess was DC talk, even though I knew that probably wasn't true. What about... Did C.S. Lewis... When you talk about the different kinds of loves, that's
yeah, he does, but I'm talking kind of pop culture.
Yeah,
but
okay. No,
it's actually Stephen Covey. Do you guys remember his book?
No.
The 7 Habits of
Highly
Effective People.
Yeah.
So his first one is be proactive. And in that, he has this whole scenario where a guy is having disagreement with his wife and having trouble with his wife. And Stephen Covey's consulting. And he just says, forget all the emotions and just proactively love the person. Forget all the baggage emotions. And that led to kind of this wellspring. He wasn't the very first person to say this.
But he kind of popularized it.
He popularized it. And so we have this love is not emotion. Love is a verb. Love is an action.
Yeah.
And what I want to say, based on modern emotion theory, is it's both. And actually, you're going to lose something important if you don't understand that.
Okay.
So I'm part of a generation, maybe it's the Asian in me, maybe it's, a generational thing where we were taught to stuff down our feelings.
Yeah.
And just do and create good in the world, be successful, be powerful. And Jamie Smith, who I'm sure you guys have interacted with, he calls this being brains on a stick.
Yeah.
And you ignore the emotional life, you ignore the emotional dimensions. About 5 years ago, I called a doctor friend of mine to come to my house, and I said, I think I'm having a heart attack.
Oh.
And my heart was just beating out of my chest for seemingly no reason. He comes over. He could tell I was in distress. He's like, I don't know what's going on, but you should go to the ER. So I go to the ER. They check me out. There's nothing physiologically wrong with me. But the doctor said I had a severe anxiety attack.
Oh.
And he's like, you probably should seek help. And so I did. So I sought help. And what I realized is I was living like a brain on a stick. And I wasn't recognizing I'm an embodied person with real emotions that really affect my whole being.
Yeah.
What modern emotion theory does is it says, often we think emotions get in the way of our life.
Yeah.
Don't be scared. Don't be anxious. When in reality, our whole well-being, our emotional system is tied up in our ideas of success and thriving and hope and all of that. So think about this. How often does the Bible actually command emotions? A lot.
A lot.
Rejoice. Don't be angry. Don't be afraid.
Yeah.
Right? All the time. Why would it do that? Like, that seems weird. Shouldn't it say, like, be wise? Shouldn't it say, like
calm
wouldn't it
down.
be more like the Stoics where you're just like, just get serious about God? Why all this stuff about joy?
I don't want to be too stereotypical because I love British evangelicalism. And so I don't want to be mean to my Brits. And both of us did our studies abroad. But one of the things that I did notice about British scholarship is it's like reserve. Mm-hmm. And how even when I did my PhD, I did my dissertation on Galatians, and Paul is in his feelings in Galatians. Yeah. And a lot of people are like, I would read some British scholars who just like, they just couldn't deal with the fact that Paul was feeling so much. And the idea that what it means to be kind of, and even like the subtlety, my wife loves this stuff, where you watch like the British like movies and things, and everything's communicated by like a look, like it's like these pregnant pauses where the man can never say what is actually on his heart. And so I've tried to make it, I'm this opposite because my family is, if we got something to say, we say it. That's my family context. And so I've always been emotive. And so what you're saying to me is that when I was emotionally all over the place, I was being biblical? Is that, or did I go too far?
Absolutely. Well, this is so the way I
bias.
talk.
Go ahead.
The way I talk about in the book is I use the language, and this is just me, but I use the language of micro emotions and macro emotions. So micro emotions is like, you're watching a movie, there's a jump scare, you jump. That's a micro emotion. You can't really control that. If you're scared of something, you're scared of something. Macro emotions is kind of this barometer that our life has of how we're doing in life.
Yeah.
Right? So let's say you lose your job, or let's say, a loved one is sick in a long-term way. Like your mood goes down on the long term, right?
Yeah.
And so the Bible is actually really bound up in these macro emotions.
Yeah.
The Bible isn't like, ignore that stuff, that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to love, a lot of books on theology of love are very practical, like serve, do this, do that. And what I wanted to pay attention to, and I do a lot of work on Philippians, is how much the Bible is talking about emotional states. Paul's in prison. Yeah. He's talking about turmoil. He's talking about, I don't know what to do. Maybe I should die and depart and be with Christ. And people are like, oh, this is all rhetoric. And I'm like, if you're in prison, you're going to be feeling a lot of feelings.
Yeah. So, so you're saying the Bible gives us permission to feel, and it doesn't say don't feel, but it tries to direct those feelings. And in particular, it has a concern with how we love. And that was part of what you're getting at in the first portion. Now, when you turn to Paul and you make something of I don't know if it's a controversial claim. It feels like both a hot take and a freezing cold take, that love is at the heart of Paul's theology. What are you trying to say, and what are you not trying to say when you make that claim about the love being at the heart of Paul's theology?
What I'm trying to say is we often categorize it in a very narrow way, and we don't really let it touch Paul's big theology, whatever we think his big theology is, whether you think it's justification by faith, or whether you think it's the apocalyptic triumph of God over evil, or whether you think it's union with Christ, whatever you think it is, love is the conversation. And I think it has to do with our view of God. You know, I think I grew up with a view of God where God is very busy.
Yeah.
We shouldn't bother him. Like he's in his study working hard and he has a hard job, and we should just, this is a very Asian thing. Yeah. We should just keep our distance, do your homework, the judgmental God, the serious God, don't bother me, that sort of thing. And I actually turned to Galatians 2:20, where Paul gives a very self-revealing statement. I've been crucified with Christ. I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. And the life I live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. This is Paul's theology.
Yeah.
Right? Whatever we think about justification, and we could talk about that because I think it's related.
Yeah.
It's really about knowing the love of God.
Yeah, I do think that there's two things that happened. One is there was this pushback at one point in the church over like overly sentimental like accounts of Christianity. And the idea is that like your personal relationship with Jesus was too myopic, that it was just you and Jesus. And I've often turned to, and I get it, like Christ loved the church, he gave himself for the church. But I've often talked about Galatians 2:20 as Paul like in his own self sentimentally appropriating the truth of the gospel, because he doesn't say, which he often does a lot, Christ loved us. He says, Jesus loved me and he gave himself for me. That's Paul saying, yes, he's not denying like God's love for the world, but he's talking about what it means for him to come in. The other thing, and I want to at least say this, I don't think it's simply Asian culture that kind of has a busy God. Because I was thinking about this. I remember we had this, I don't know if you ever did this. We had this sense that we had to save up our prayers for like the one big ask, so like, I haven't asked God for anything in a long time because, I know there's a limited amount of grace and love. I said, okay, God, okay, I'm cashing in my chips right now. This is the one where I really need to come and say, God, help me. So I don't know if I thought about God as busy, but I felt like God was watching me and like, he didn't want me to bother him all of the time with things that weren't that important. And so I would say, I haven't asked you for a lot because that would be inappropriate. But I'm going to ask you for this one thing. And given the fact that I'm not asking for anything in a couple of months, God, you should give it to me. So I don't think that you're unique there. So you did mention that love and justification are related. Yeah. How might you say they're related? Okay.
So I have a different attitude toward justification than some of my like uber reform friends. But I often think of that in kind of classic Christianity or reformational Christianity, they use the image of the law court.
Yes.
The image, of like God as a judge sitting with a gavel and a black robe, and you're there in handcuffs. Yeah. And then, the judge bangs the gavel and says you're guilty, but then comes down, takes off his robe, puts on your, that kind of thing. And there are a couple of moments in the Old Testament where you could fit that in. Yeah. But I'd rather look at this as covenantal language. And I get this from people like Anthony Thistleton. And they basically argue this is covenantal language of being in the right with somebody and something. So, Jesus, for example, giving the parable of the tax collector and the Pharisee, says two people went to the temple to pray. Yeah. Tax collector, Pharisee. The Pharisee said, I thank thee, O Lord, I'm not like other men, greedy, murderous, adulterous, et cetera, et cetera. And then the tax collector comes, wouldn't even look up to heaven, but beats his chest saying, God, have mercy on me, sinner that I am. And Jesus says, which one of them went home justified? Yeah. And what he means by that is not
who is declared innocent.
Law court thing. I think this is a relationship with God. Yeah. Right? We've done wrong by God. And how can we be in the right with God? And the paradigm that I think Scripture uses within covenant, especially Paul, the paradigm he uses is actually family. Yeah. It's not, see, with the law court image, it's like, hey, Esau, you're off the hook. You get to go free. Leave the courtroom and never see me again.
Peace, I'm out.
Yeah, you never see the judge again. If you leave, if you get off the hook, you're never going back.
I'm telling you something. I'm never coming back.
He's getting his passport.
There was this time where I found this is crazy. I've thought about this. I was pulled up by the police, right? And I thought I was going to go to jail. And like a lot of things happen. I was innocent, by the way, of the crime of which I was accused. But you're right. When the person said you can be free to go, say, no, I don't want to hang out with you, Mr. Cop. Now we developed this relationship and you've declared me innocent. Let's be friends. You're right. That's not necessarily how I would think about it.
No.
But in a family, you would stay as a part of the family.
Yeah. In a covenantal relationship, to be in the right means, you're fully within the family. You're incorporated. This is all Galatian stuff. Yeah. This is the Abrahamic family. This is the household of faith, Galatians 6:10. And so when I think of love and justification, it's easy in a sense to let someone off the hook and say, I never want to see you again.
Yeah.
It's much harder to say, I will bear the burden of this damage that you've done, but we're family and I need you to be fully in.
So you're saying that justification is both motivated by God's love, and the result of justification is the restoration of a loving relationship. And so love kind of enfolds justification on both sides. You're not saying that justification isn't important to Paul, but you're saying that it's in Paul's account of Christian theology, love leads to and then flows from justification.
Absolutely. And what I often say is a lot of the stuff that we argue about in terms of atonement theories, justification, apocalyptic, all this other stuff, I would say these are mechanics.
Yeah.
And the mechanics are important to know about and to care about, but we have to know what the gospel actually is. So it's helpful to know how it works, but it actually is the love of God.
I've got a follow-up
it's a transformative love of God.
We have a question from our producer. Go ahead.
Let's do it.
Nijay, because there's also a common trend right now among a certain type of theologian would be the best way. You're right. We should love people. And the best way to do that is to tell them how sinful they are, everything they're doing wrong, and to essentially, that's the most loving thing you can do to someone is to say you're going to be condemned to hell unless you change your behavior. How does this kind of relate? How would you use what you just said to respond to kind of that type of thinking?
Yeah. First, I would respond, how's that going? Well, I was talking to, the Voxology folks, a few weeks ago about this. And I said, what if every time you went on social media to harass somebody, you had to commit to praying that God would bless them? You would pray every day for a year. Yeah. What if that was, because I actually wrote an online article today on the whole issue of toxic empathy. I call it holy empathy. And there's this mentality that, we're pampering people if we don't speak truth to them. We're one of my sections of this is, doesn't compassion spoil the wicked?
Yeah.
And one thing I say in here is, what if I miraculously gave you the power of controlling the sun and the rain for a year? You decide the entire earth, who gets sun, how much rain. Wouldn't you eventually come to some formula on who gets sun and who gets rain?
Yeah.
Does North Korea deserve it? Does Putin deserve it? Does, do the terrorists deserve it? And we'll have our algorithms. We'll feel really good about it. Yeah. And what does Jesus say? God causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good and sends rain on the righteous and unrighteous. All in the context of talking about loving your neighbor.
Yeah.
All in the context of loving your neighbor. Yeah. I really feel like affection, compassion, empathy, this is a superpower.
Yeah.
This is the greatest superpower we have. I actually end my piece by talking about Martin Niemöller. I don't know if you guys know who Martin Niemöller is, but he was a German pastor during World War II. He was actually a supporter of Hitler.
Yeah.
Until he kind of saw the atrocities that happened and he just came to a breaking point. And he ended up writing that famous poem. First they came for the communists and I didn't speak. And then they came for the socialists and I didn't speak. The trade unionists, the Jews. Then they came for me and there was no one left to speak for me. And I think one of the unfortunate outcomes of social media is the dehumanizing of the other.
Yeah.
That distance.
Yeah.
I'm on a couple of committees, a couple academic committees, and I'm on these academic committees with people that are very theologically different than I am.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of a couple of people right now, and I'm thinking theologically we're kind of as different as East is from the West, but because of our experience in this committee, we've spent a lot of time together.
Yeah.
And I've gotten to know their family, and I've gotten to know their heart, and we pray together, and we read scripture together. and we laugh together. It's hard to hate someone you know well. It's really hard to hate someone you know well.
And I don't think, here's the thing, I don't think that, so one of the things that often happens is that there's a truth that can be distorted.
Yeah.
I think there are times in which it's necessary to love someone so much that you want more for them than they're currently experiencing. Mm-hmm. And you see the destructive behaviors that they're going through. But that actually has to arise out of real, I think, compassion for people.
I agree. Yes.
And so the question isn't like, is what I'm saying actually motivated by a desire for them to flourish?
Yes.
Or is it actually a disdain? And so one of the things that has helped me is like, am I grieved by people's sin or am I frustrated by it? And I think that those are two different things, because part of what it means, like and maybe this is the other thing, and this is Acts. This is Nijay's book, so I won't say too much, and I'll stay away from Paul, and so I'll stay in the book of Acts. One of the things that's always struck me about this Peter's sermon on Pentecost is that Peter tells the story of Jesus's life, death, and resurrection, and the people hear it, and then they're cut to the heart. Mm-hmm. And that's always been how I've thought about what it meant for me to encounter Jesus. In other words, when someone tells me that Jesus dies for me and I look at Jesus's life, I can kind of intuit my own sinfulness. That's what Peter does. He encounters the holiness of God and he's made aware of his own shortcomings. And people then are made of their shortcomings in relationship to God. They're sometimes assuming that God wants nothing to do with me. And you would say, no, that holy God is the one who loves you. And so the idea that you always have to humble someone for them to understand that God is holy isn't always the way that the gospel is preached. What is sometimes they encounter God, see his holiness, intuit their own sinfulness, and then have to be reminded of God's love. But that's too far afield. I want to make sure that we say a few things about this. So if I take your book's major thesis on board, how does that change how I live as a Christian? Or how does that change how I might read Paul? So like, what do I need to do different or think differently or feel differently if Nijay is indeed correct?
Well, my book in some ways is a tribute to the work of St. Augustine, and I ended up doing kind of a deep dive. I feel like the Catholics are going to really like this book because of that. It's really, I start the book off, and let me just read this, because I just feel like this quote kind of says it all, and this is from Augustine. Yeah. He says, when we ask whether someone is a good person, we're not asking what he believes or hopes, but what he loves.
Oh.
This is huge because we think the driver of our life is what we think.
Yeah.
And how many hundreds of years ago did Augustine actually tell us something we're only learning now through emotion theory? That our life is actually wrapped up in the things we love.
Yeah.
And some of the things we love are good, like our family. And some of the things we love are not good, like power, recognition, violence, whatever it is. And so the way I like to explain it to people kind of on the lay level is, imagine your soul has tentacles, invisible tentacles. And their tendency is to wrap around things. And what your soul wraps around are the things that you love. And that ends up guiding and driving your life, no matter what you think you think. Yeah. And the problem is, if those tentacles wrap themselves around the wrong things, then our life is going to get spun in the wrong direction. And I think that's true of me. I see a spiritual director who's kind of like a therapist.
Yeah.
And almost every month we meet, we're talking about, he wouldn't use this language. We're talking about, what have I wrapped those tentacles around?
Yeah.
Control, money, power, whatever it is. What have I wrapped that around? So what Augustine basically says is, we will not find peace and flourishing in our life until we rightly order our loves.
Yeah.
And what does that mean? That if we love God rightly, love Christ, love the Spirit, love the Father, then we're not going to be able to love ourselves or the world around us. But once we love Christ, love God in the right ways, it's going to order the rest of our life so we can love ourselves, neighbor, friends, strangers, and enemies. And so the impact, I think it's most helpful to think about, what does a healthy Christian look like?
Yeah.
A healthy Christian, I feel like the greatest metric for a healthy Christian is the Augustinian principle.
Yeah.
Love of God, love of neighbor, and the next level, the kind of Spirit help me level, is love of enemy.
Oh,
I mean, that's going to be, to me, that's the hardest teaching in the whole Bible.
Yeah. I was thinking, and forgive me, because they always run together in my brain, because I'm teaching Colossians and Ephesians together. And so forgive me for not remembering which one of these I'm quoting from. But I often talk about Paul as a mystic. And because we often think of Paul as this kind of legalistic person who has these kind of logical syllogisms. But I think it's in Ephesians, we says, you might know the love of Christ that surpasses all understanding. Mm-hmm. And the idea that he talks about this thing to like know something that you can't actually know. So in other words, he's hoping that you somehow enter into an experience of God's love as his prayer for like the Ephesians. And so Paul, who we think of as, like you said, and we're not denying Paul's other doctrines, but as this rigid kind of arguer who does, as you said, mention love. Now, I know this might be, once again, I could be completely wrong, but I was thinking about this other thing. You were talking about Augustine. Mm-hmm. And maybe I can ask you this part. The Holy Spirit as love that you mentioned in the book, was that at all influenced by like his doctrine of the Trinity? It talks about the Spirit as love, as the bonding agent between the Father and the Son. I know that's super nerdy, and you can say no, but I'm just asking you, how far does Augustine run in the influence in this book?
Not to that level.
Okay.
I'm actually afraid of getting reviewed by an Augustinian expert.
No, the Holy Spirit is love then, which just comes from your reading of Paul and in your time.
Yeah, I mean, it is just, from my reading of Paul that, Father, Son, and Spirit, love is attributed to all of them. Yeah. And so it's not just, we have ways of kind of parceling out the Trinity. And I think in general swaths, that's helpful, but in specifics, it's often unhelpful. But this idea of the Spirit as Christ present with us, then we experience the ministry of love, just like in Galatians and Romans, it talks about being able to cry, Abba, Father. That's all mediated by the Spirit. Yeah. Right? The Spirit is the indwelling presence of Christ.
Did you have, as a part of your goal, kind of the rehabilitation of Paul? Because most people don't associate Paul with love. And to argue that this is central to Paul's own theology, maybe I'll put it this way. Do you believe that is true, or is it a rhetorical corrective? Like, do you think it's the actual heart, or is it just like, I needed to kind of correct people who are kind of going in the direction, and there can be a nuance? So do you believe like, no, love is central in Paul in the same way that it's central in Jesus, or are you giving us a corrective?
Both. I do think it is actually central to Paul. I mean, my best argument is it's more pervasive than any other theme. Yeah. To me, the fact that it appears in Philemon, and it doesn't just appear as the word love, it appears as Onesimus is my splankna. He's my heart. He's my guts. Yeah. He's my viscera.
And he appeals on the basis of love.
Absolutely. And the fact that it appears there. So I don't know. I know you're working on Philemon right now too, but I'm working on Philemon, and I feel like Philemon is the only actual letter from Paul where he's writing as his non-professional self.
I was actually saying that. I agree. I think that, and I want to make sure that we that I don't want to say this well. There are the things that Paul says as these abstract truths, which are important. But when he actually has the power to intervene in someone's life, you begin to see how those truths hit flesh. Yeah. And that's what I mean. Like when he's writing like as just like a dude. So yes, I agree that Paul's writing there. So do you think that, maybe I'll put it this way. So you think that if you're correct, then Paul, this freezing cold take, Paul and Jesus are closer together than maybe the stereotypical perception of Jesus is loving and Paul is harsh, that they're closer together than most Christians might realize?
Absolutely. And I'm a little mystified by people's perception of Paul. I think it's less from what he writes and more from the way people have presented Paul as kind of brash and, but also because my work on Paul has leaned more towards like 1st, 2nd Thessalonians, Philippians, 2nd Timothy, where you see a more personal side of Paul. You see a tender-hearted Paul. I'm working on 2 Corinthians right now, translating through it. I mean, this is a very emotionally troubled person.
Yes.
This is like, it's like when you're at a restaurant and you're overhearing a couple fight, like, and someone's crying and you feel awkward being there.
Yeah.
Like, that's how I feel reading 2 Corinthians. I'm like,
it's rough.
This is like last gasp effort at healing a relationship that is severely traumatized.
So we have,
and so I think Paul, people often say, I hear people say about, oh, you wouldn't like him. You wouldn't like to hang out with him. Read Philippians. Read 2 Timothy. I mean, this is a Paul that had really close friendships.
So we have this thing that we sometimes close the podcast with. Yeah. Some people have hot takes, right?
Yeah.
A hot take is like your controversial opinion, kind of like the stuff that gets people into trouble with like
Lord of the Rings.
Like Lord of the Rings is bad. We have this thing called freezing cold takes,
okay,
which are so obviously true that that they're themselves revelatory. Mm-hmm. And I thought, since once again we're talking about like love, this is a chance to give you a freezing cold theological take.
I mean, it's funny that we're doing this, Nijay, because essentially this whole interview has been your freezing cold take that, hey, the guy who wrote the passage that's read at every single wedding about
every
love,
wedding.
He really likes love. It's a big deal.
You just stole my freezing cold take.
Love is good.
Here it goes, though. Your freezing cold take is, I'm going to tell Nijay, my freezing cold take.
Yes.
Paul and Jesus.
Yeah.
Not separated. Agree on central ideas. That's my freezing cold take is, despite what you hear that Paul is one way and Jesus is one way, if my buddy Nijay is correct, Paul and Jesus might agree on the essential aspects of the Christian faith, namely love being central. Paul and Jesus friends, that's my freezing cold take. Do you have a freezing cold theological take?
I want to hear Nijay's first, and then I'll give mine.
Oh, it can't be related to this?
It can be related to it. It can be related. Yes, it can be related.
Okay, so my freezing cold take, which in some circles would be controversial, is where Paul learned true love is from the Old Testament.
Oh, freezing cold take. Paul learned love from the Old Testament. Okay, then. Here we go.
Read Deuteronomy.
My freezing cold take is that God actually, truly, really does love you. That you're not a sinful piece of crap. That God does not love you because Jesus died for you.
He doesn't begrudgingly.
Doesn't do it begrudgingly, but he truly loves you. I think that's my takeaway from our interview today.
Yeah, one of the things that I say to my students all of the time is that if you look across, especially Paul's letters, that Paul does not refer to Christians by the worst of who they are. He doesn't actually call them sinners over and over again. He consistently calls them saints.
Yeah,
saints.
And he consistently talks about who they are. He will talk about their past, but he will go, that was your past. And so Paul, even the most you can make the argument that in the most broken churches, Corinth and then Galatia, he has his most beautiful articulations of love. And so you're correct. So all that to say is, don't be satisfied with simply listening to me and Nijay ramble on about love, but pick up his book and pick up Strange Religion. Matter of fact, this is what you need to do. Consider this like your tumbling down into the Gupta universe, the Gupta cinematic universe. Pick up Strange Religion. Pick up his book on, what's the faith one? I want to make sure I say it correctly.
Paul and the Language of Faith.
Paul and the Language of Faith. And so please take advantage of this, but it's not often that you get scholars who can climb the mountain and read all of the technical stuff that, most of us don't have time to read, but then bring it down the mountain and allow for us regular people to understand. And you really do have a gift. This is me giving you some ecclesial love. Here's to say that what you actually consistently do is to bring that scholarship to the church. I think it's a gift. So thank you so much for coming.
Thanks.
Thank you for the book. Pick this one up and pick up all of his stuff.
And if that's not enough, Nijay Gupta, Nijay is also a Holy Post pundit.
That's right.
And recently, if you want his takes on love, wait until you hear his takes on In-N-Out.
In-N-Out Burger.
And recently did a Hill to Die on Holy Post Plus only. So
pick it up there. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Nijay.
Yeah, this is great. Thanks.
The Esau McCaulley podcast is a production of Holy Post Media, produced by Mike Stay Low, Stray Low. If you know, now you know. Edited by Seth Gorbett, like a Corvette. Music by Rob Knorr. Make sure to follow the show wherever you get your podcast and leave a review so more people can find it. See you next time. I'm out.
I'm penning these letters with prayers they can aid your endeavors. It's clever benevolence, tasted it, wrestle with, still wrestling. Touch my side and it crushed my pride and told me I'm blessed within. Receive a Christian platitude with gratitude, but in the saddest news I live in doesn't add up to the Beatitudes. Catch me in the catacombs, chiefing like they Pat Mahomes, catching bullets, tackle foes, running plays, defending zones. Field got them doing football numbers, only half is grown. He was acting grown.